really we are introducing this new concept, covert allyship, and based on what Mustafa and Christian just said, it captures a new space, essentially a space where allyship cannot be straightforward because of external conditions and maybe repression that those who exercise allyship would otherwise face. And that's interesting because that is generalizable towards all human rights context at large. And it also connects even further to maybe how human rights develop and spread, right? Because you have often phases of progress, phases of regress that change over time, and until finally these human rights issues are more comprehensively addressed. And that is a larger context where it theoretically matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good point, Felix. So that's the kind of the main term we coin, covert allyship. Allyship is probably a practice that many of us and many of the listeners are familiar with. It's about how organizations and leaders support disadvantaged groups, right? But how do you do that in a context where you're very restricted and there's all these different barriers? So you have to do it very discreetly, very subtly. So I think that's kind of the core contribution. And then I think the other contribution we make is also about towards kind of the HR, international HR literature around how how do you implement these policies? When you cannot, implement the same policies in all your subsidiaries around the world, you must localize, you must adapt. And there were a couple of really interesting practices that they used to do that. Maybe this already I'm already getting into the last question, but one of the things these multinationals are good at is kind of organizational learning. So if, for instance, if they establish a very successful initiative in a subsidiary somewhere in the Middle East or in South America, they can actually disseminate and share these best practices with other subsidiaries around the world, so they can learn from their different sister organizations.